I am pleased to present to you an audio sampling of the book, The Anatomy of a Miracle, by Dr. James B. Richards, national best-selling author. The introduction and Chapter 1. Every culture in the world has ancient stories of miracles. These stories are widely dismissed by historians as local myths. Yet, when similar myths have been handed down for centuries in a multitude of geographic locations, they cannot be dismissed easily as myth. People from different parts of the globe with no means of communication do not make up identical stories. In the Arctic regions of North America, the elders tell stories of miraculous healings that occur to this day. One such example is a story that comes from the Arctic of a man who should have died when injured on a hunt. The snowmobiles of earlier years were not the sleek machines of today. They didn't have all the bells and whistles. In fact, many of them didn't even have lights. They were very heavy and quite awkward to maneuver. After launching unaware over snowdrift, this hunter's snowmobile landed on him, severely breaking his leg. As he lay helplessly in the freezing snow, his death seemed imminent. In just a few hours, the sub-zero temperatures would penetrate his Arctic clothing, and he would freeze. But this story, like many that are told, had a much different ending. Instead, this man employed the beliefs and practices taught by his elders. As he lay in the snow with a severely broken leg, he imagined his leg being healed as he called on the Creator. He even felt it move as all he imagined became reality. In a short time, he was up on his feet, resuming his hunt. Miracles are real. Every culture has records of miracles. Some are of miraculous healings, like the story of the Inuit hunter. Some appear to defy the laws of physics, like Qigong, masters of China who move objects with energy. Or like Buddhist monks who sit with nothing but a loincloth in freezing snow, covered with blankets, dipped in an icy river, yet who generate enough body heat to dry the blankets and maintain their warmth. The New Testament of the Bible and other religious groups tell stories of people being physically transported from one location to another. Then there are the rain dances of the indigenous natives of North America that were said to have brought rain in times of drought. The list is endless. The evidence is undeniable. Both sacred and secular history abounds with accounts of miracles. With the emergence of quantum physics, the scientific community is making incredible advancements in understanding the miraculous. What once was accepted by faith, intuition, or empirical observation now is explained in 21st century language. The ancient texts and the scientific journals are sounding increasingly similar. The ancients used metaphors of nature to explain the process of a miracle. The ancient parable employed by numerous cultural and religious groups were the only available examples that made the miraculous understandable to the mind of that day. Ironically, it is that very language which enabled people to experience miracles in the past, unable to experience them today. Ancient language makes the idea of miracles seem archaic and unscientific. It doesn't cause us to conceptualize as much as it causes us to dismiss. Herein lies the ultimate secret of assessing miracles. Believing for a miracle is not about intellectual data. It is about conceptualization and integration. Therefore, the language used to facilitate conceptualization must be adapted to benefit the listener. A parable is only valuable when the language being employed has the desired effect on the listener. The secret to getting a miracle. The New Testament often uses the Greek word logos when referring to the Word of God. Logos is not so much about the literal words spoken. It's more about the logic, wisdom, and integrity of the words spoken or written. While various religious groups agonize over the literal interpretation of the words in their ancient texts, they miss the point. It is not the words themselves that are so valuable. What matters is those words' capacity to help us conceptualize and integrate those words into our lives in a functional manner. The words themselves are not holy or valuable beyond their ability to move us past intellectual data and into experiential knowledge. People must see, perceive, or conceptualize a miracle before they can believe for it. The purpose of parables was to make it possible for the people of the day to conceptualize something they had no language to explain. Explaining the miraculous in a way the mind could conceptualize also enabled people to believe and conceive things as reality. This entire process was part of persuading the heart to believe for a miracle. The laws that govern miracles have never changed. It is a terminology needed to make conception possible that has changed. Quantum science is using a new language to describe the same phenomenon. The metaphoric language of the 21st century must be a terminology that simplifies the inner working of the miraculous, just as the language of farming, shepherding, and current events did for the mind of earlier days. Parables that talk about growing wheat are of little value to the average person in the modern world, especially when he has never seen a wheat field or worked a garden. The world, while teetering on the verge of destruction, is simultaneously entering into a new day of miracles. Cutting-edge scientific discovery is giving 20th century terminology and scientific explanation to what the world once knew only by intuition or empirical observation. We are living in a day when science and miracles are finding common ground, narrowing the once enormous gap to little more than a semantics issue. The anatomy of a miracle puts that which has been known for thousands of years into a language that is readily understandable to the 21st century mind, giving us the opportunity to develop a faith, a deep knowing that we can move into the invisible realm and come back with a miracle. Chapter 1. Rediscovering Childhood. Deep in the heart of every human being, there was at one time an innate longing to see and experience the supernatural. Unfortunately, like all children, we were taught to grow up. Growing up should be the development of our inherent godlike qualities that seem so natural and logical to children. Instead, society in nearly every culture has made growing up a denial of who we are in relation to our Creator, how we were created, and how we should function. For most of the world, adulthood is the denial of all that is unique and inherent to us as the children of our Creator. Those of us adults who do continue to embrace some notion of our divine identity, instead of making it simple and natural, make it difficult and out of reach. We have somehow come to believe that those gifts and inexplicable abilities that belong to all men are relegated to the few who will adhere to some religious discipline, aesthetic lifestyle, or code of perfectionist conduct. And true to our nature, if we believe it is hard, it is. If we believe it is beyond our reach, it is. If we disqualify ourselves, we are disqualified. To quote Henry Ford, whether we think we can or whether we think we can't, we are right. The greatest miracle worker of all time never taught how hard or difficult it was to experience the miraculous. Instead, he expressed contempt for those who made God's provision difficult and out of reach. Jesus took the position that making something harder to get was tantamount to taking it away from people. Instead of trying to make people live up to unrealistic codes or participate in religious or aesthetic practices, he simply urged them to only believe. The written record of his miracles, which was only a small portion of what actually occurred, happened with no great fanfare or religious observations. Possibly, in our process of becoming adults, we have lost the divine sense that fueled our imagination as children. Maybe our intellectual mind has so dominated our every perception that all things that cannot be intellectually explained are simply washed from our consciousness. Perhaps we have believed a lie and made everything about life too difficult. Or maybe, as the greatest miracle worker of all time said, we forgot how to think like children. If connecting to the miraculous requires our rediscovering of who we came into this world intended to be, we each have to ask ourselves, will I allow such a thing? Can I give up so much? We have spent our entire lives developing a perception of the world that makes us seem intellectually superior. Medical science ignores cutting-edge concrete data, instead preferring outdated, disproved models that serve only to line the pockets of the drug industry. We have defined rules of science, yet many of those rules only exist in non-provable theory. We have fought to suppress information that exposes the possibility that we can be more than that which serves a global economy. The accepted worldview is one that facilitates our inflated egos, which has grown disproportionately enormous as we have passively surrendered our true identities. Our entire lives from the time of becoming adults has been dictated to an illusion of reality. Children have a much greater need to enjoy life than to protect ego and win arguments. Children don't need intellectual explanations for what works. They don't care why the light comes on when they flip the switch. They just don't want to be in the dark. It is of little concern who gets the credit for building the toy. They just want to play with it. Children have little concern for who owns the toy, as long as they get to play with it. In order to become like children, we must be willing to accept what is, whether or not it fits into our life view. The adult in us wants to compare our current beliefs and opinions to those embraced by others. Before considering what works or what will bring quality to our lives, we want to know if accepting another's view will make us wrong. Right and wrong are based on intellectual rigidity with no allowance for relativity. For thousands of years, mankind lived and operated, evidently, fairly successfully on the oral traditions held by the most ancient of civilizations. There was little need for scientific explanation. It just needed to work. No doubt, there were many superstitions and religious ideals that didn't work. Unfortunately, they usually were accepted based on the persuasiveness of the soothsayer who benefited from the idea. In time, religious dogma and tribal superstition exchanged that which worked for that which gave control to the few. What was consistent with creation, or what the Chinese called the Tao, and the Greeks tagged the Logos, was ignored. The wisdom of the Creator was exchanged for the logic of ego-centered, power-hungry men. This departure from what worked drove man into another extreme: science. Modern science, to some extent, was a reaction to the superstitious mindset that ushered civilization into the Dark Ages. Like all reactionary thinking, it threw out too much. It rejected the good and the bad. In an attempt to bring logic and order, a new extreme was imposed upon man that led him away from his natural God-given rights and benefits. This new science sought to explain the world in a framework that simply put a new group of power brokers in control. They didn't wear headdresses, call on spirits, or chant. They adorned themselves with suits and were affluent and educated. Yet, try as they did, their educations were as limited as the ancient shamans they sought to eradicate. The former tried to understand the world by subjectively interpreting what they couldn't see. This new group tried to convince themselves that the only thing that existed was what they could see. Newtonian physics became the crown jewel of logic and explanation of all things. Because there were so many things right about these mathematical equations, it was assumed that nothing could be added or taken away. This was the be-all and know-all end to all questions. All the questions of the universe were naively interpreted in a manner that would preserve and protect the supremacy of the accepted logic. Man, as an adult, has an either-or attitude. Ego and agendas are so closely connected to ideas that there is little room for growth understanding, or even perception beyond what supports our accepted views. History has proven that much of mankind would rather die clinging to an untruth than embrace a new truth and live. So laws, religions, and governments are established to protect what we have accepted, whether it works or not. Now that we all agree on a common idea or belief, we are adults. No new truth. Accepting a new reality has nothing to do with right or wrong. Why? It is because there is no new truth. All truth always has existed. It was here before we were born. It will be here when we depart. It works for others regardless of our opinions. It exists where we see it and where we don't. It isn't new. It is only new to us. Yet, there is something in us as adults that make us feel inferior when we identify a truth that we have not yet understood. We feel that to say, "I didn't know," is to say, "I am flawed." We think that to expand what we currently believe is to refute what we previously believed. We are relegated to a life of limitations because of the fear of being wrong. I've got great news for you. To move into the realm of the miraculous has little to do with being right or wrong. For example, as I stood at the base of a great mountain range in Western America, it looked as though the mountains touched the sky. From the base of the mountains, it looked as though there was nothing that existed beyond what I could see. As I drove up the mountain and reached the peak, I saw for the first time the incredible view that had just hours before lay beyond my sight. What I saw from the mountain's peak did not deny what I saw from the basin below. It was simply a new view from a new vantage point. Newtonian physics is evidently very accurate when dealing with the seen world. It gives us the equations to launch space vehicles, design aircraft, and pretty much conquer the seen world. But there is an unseen world, a world that lies beyond the explanation of Newtonian physics. That world is governed by an entirely different set of rules and equations. The subatomic world has come to be understood through a science called quantum physics. Quantum physics is a science. It is a science, however, that touches on the unseen, that part of our world that previously has been consigned to the religious and the superstitious. Quantum physics is able to help us identify the truth of some of the oldest religious teachings in the world. It is able to give us a language that makes sense to our generation and explains what happens in the invisible world when we apply spiritual truth. It is my desire that this book will open your eyes to such an extent that you will open your heart to a life of possibility available to all, given by our Creator. In so doing, you will enjoy the very best life has to offer. What others call miraculous will be your normal. There will be no need of a declaration of being wrong. There will be no new truth. There only will be the willingness to look at the world from a new vantage point that opens an entirely new world of limitless possibility. Like little children, we will have little concern for who was right and who was wrong. We will simply enjoy the goodness of God in a world that is designed for the miraculous.